What if I told you that for over 200,000 years, our ancestors lived as hunters, gatherers, and wanderers? 200,000 years. That's 200,000 years of walking, 200,000 years of waking up each morning, not knowing where you'd sleep that night, not knowing which direction food would come from, not knowing which way you'd head tomorrow. 200,000 years of humans living in balance with nature, with the stars, with the wind, with the wild animals, never once thinking about changing any of it. So what flipped everything? What was it that made a species that had spent its entire history wandering suddenly stop, pick up a piece of stone, and start carving it? Not to hunt, not to build shelter, but for something invisible to the naked eye. That's the question buried beneath every history textbook ever written. It lives under all the historical facts we memorized in school, and it lives inside certain stones dug from the earth in Turkey, Iraq, and Syria. Stones that are right now overturning everything we thought we knew for hundreds of years. Close your eyes for a moment and come with me. Go back about 12,000 years. The land we now call the Middle East looked nothing like what you know today. Green meadows blanketed rolling hills that stretched as far as you could see. Cool streams ran down from limestone mountains into valleys below. Herds of gazelles, deer, and wild sheep grazed in open fields. Colourful birds swept over the tree lines, and the air carried the scent of wild flowers blooming before dawn. The last great ice age was drawing to a close. The glaciers that had sealed off Europe and Asia were melting slowly. Temperatures crept upward. Rain began falling with regularity, and the world opened itself to humans with a generosity it hadn't shown in tens of thousands of years. Vegetation thrived, wild animals were everywhere, rivers ran full to their banks. A small group of people, maybe 40 or 50 of them, had made camp in the shade of a large limestone outcrop. Some of the men were sharpening flint tools with steady hands, left hand gripping the core stone, right hand striking with a harder piece in a rhythmic beat, the sharp clacking sound cutting through the cool air. Some of the women were peeling tubers they'd gathered that day, filling the air with their raw, faintly bitter smell. The children slept near a fire, still glowing with embers, a thin thread of smoke rising toward a sky packed with stars. They had no names for where they were, no homes to return to, no mental map of where tomorrow would take them. They had fire, spears, and each other. That life might look desperately hard through modern eyes. But if you asked a modern anthropologist, they'd tell you that people in that era worked maybe 4 or 5 hours a day. Then they rested, told stories around the fire, watched the stars, and moved on when they felt like moving. No debt, no taxes, no boss, no such thing as being late. When a hunter-gatherer ate, they ate what nature provided. Venison one day, wild fruit the next, figs, red berries, roots of all kinds. The body received a diverse range of nutrients, and there were no diseases passed from domesticated animals because wild animals lived in the forest, not in the same shelter. But then something happened, something that changed everything. Not a disaster, not a plague, not an enemy tribe. Something that happened deep inside the human mind. Something no scientist has ever been able to reduce to a number. Something called faith. Belief in something larger than yourself, larger than your tribe, larger than life itself. The belief that there are forces you can't see, but that move the world from behind the scenes. The belief that stars, wind, rivers, and storms aren't just natural phenomena, but expressions of something sacred that must be honored. And when faith appeared among humans, the first thing they needed was a place to worship, a place to bow before something greater than themselves, a place to speak to what lay beyond their understanding, and that is when everything began. Most textbooks teach us that civilization started with agriculture. Humans began growing crops and raising animals, had surplus food, had free time to think about other things, to build cities, temples, and laws. It sounds logical, orderly, like a lesson with clear sequential steps, like a staircase you can climb one step at a time. But that might be something we've been getting wrong all along, because there's a piece of evidence, one that archaeologists dug out of the earth in southeastern Turkey, that is overturning every theory we ever held. That piece of evidence is called Göbekli Tepe. It's older than anything you could imagine, older than any civilization we know, older than writing, older than the first city, and older than agriculture itself. If this turns out to be true, it means the sequence of events we always believed in is completely upside down. Not agriculture first, then temples, temples first, and then agriculture followed. And that changes everything we thought we knew about ourselves. Humans didn't build cities because they were rich enough. They didn't build temples because they had spare time. They built these things because something inside the human mind compelled them to. Something burning, something that couldn't be ignored, something that had to be made real, given shape, given form, given something you could actually see with your eyes. Humans built because humans believed. And once they believed, they couldn't stop building. That is the true origin point of every civilization that ever made it into the history books. Egypt, Greece, Mesopotamia, India, China. Every single one of them started with the same question. Who are we? And why are we here? Because it was inside that question that the very first star of human civilization began to shine. In the darkness before dawn, in the cold breath of mountain winds, a group of humans stood watching the stars and dreaming. Dreaming of something they had no words to describe. Dreaming of something greater than themselves. Dreaming of a place where they could bow down before that greatness. Dreaming of standing stones that would rise to mark the way for generations to come. When morning broke, they picked up rocks. And that right there, was the true dawn of the human species. Not the day we planted our first seed, not the day we built our first city wall, not the day we invented writing. It was the day we stopped walking, looked up at the sky, and felt that there was something we needed to build, for something greater than ourselves. Civilization wasn't born from hunger. It wasn't born from comfort, and it wasn't born from rational calculation. It was born from the deepest desire humans have ever had, the desire to connect with something larger than themselves, something that would endure long after their bodies had returned to dust. And that desire, 200,000 years on, has never gone out. It still burns in every human heart, every day, everywhere. No matter what era we live in or what kind of civilization we build. If you compressed all of human history into a single year, every civilization from Göbekli Tepe to today would take up only the final 3 days. That perspective forces you to reconsider, how old is what we call civilization, really? And how long has what we call primitive actually been with us? But that doesn't mean those 200,000 years were empty. In that vast stretch of time, humans discovered fire, invented tools, created language, crossed oceans in simple canoes to reach Australia 40,000 years ago, and painted cave art that still leaves us breathless today. The people of that era were not stupid, they were not savage, and they were not to be pitied. They were simply people who lived differently in a different system, in a different time frame. What's remarkable is that in those 200,000 years, humans weren't just walking and eating. They were dreaming, singing, painting on cave walls, performing rituals for their dead, and staring at stars, wondering what those stars were. Curiosity, a sense of beauty, the need to explain the world. Those were never products of civilization. They were never born when civilization was born. They were with us from the very start. And maybe that's the real reason humans built temples. Not because they were wealthy, not because they had free time, but because what had lived inside the human mind for 200,000 years had finally found a way out into the open, into something you could see with your eyes. Picture yourself standing on a dry, wind-swept hillside in southern Turkey. The air is hot and parched. Brown dust billows when the wind picks up. In every direction, nothing but grey limestone and brittle, bleached grassland stretching to the horizon. Nothing interesting, nothing special. But if you dug down just a few inches beneath your feet, everything would change, forever. In 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt travelled to the city of Şanlıurfa in southeastern Turkey. He'd heard stories about a mysterious hill that locals called Göbekli Tepe, which in Turkish means Potbelly Hill. The farmers in the area had known about the hill for years, but nobody paid it much attention. It looked like any other rocky mound, nothing worth digging up. Klaus Schmidt thought otherwise. He climbed up the hill, walked it slowly, studied the surface, crouched down to touch certain stones, and he knew immediately. Something was buried there. The excavation began, and what came out of the ground left the entire world of archaeology stunned for years. Massive, T-shaped limestone pillars, some over 16 feet tall, some weighing tens of tons, arranged in precise circles, clearly by deliberate design. On the surface of those pillars, animals had been carved with extraordinary skill. A crocodile with arms spread wide, a scorpion curled at the edge, a lion standing still, a vulture with wings open, and dozens of other creatures chiseled into the stone with astonishing care. All of it built over 11,600 years ago. That number stops everyone who hears it. Göbekli Tepe is nearly 7,000 years older than the Great Pyramid of Giza, more than 6,000 years older than Stonehenge, older than the oldest writing ever discovered, and older than the world's first city. And most shockingly of all, it's older than agriculture. Think about that carefully. The people who built Göbekli Tepe had never grown a crop, had never raised a domesticated animal, had no wheels, no writing, not even a permanent village. They were nothing more than wandering hunter-gatherers, no different from their ancestors of the previous tens of thousands of years. So how did they build this? Picture it, hundreds of hunters, maybe thousands, converging on a single mountaintop, cold northern winds slamming into the warmth of bodies working hard, hands rough with cuts and calluses from sharpening and hauling stone, bodies wrapped in animal hides that still smelled faintly of raw meat. One by one, they picked up pieces of limestone. One by one, they began to carve, patiently, deliberately. No one gave the order. There was no king, no overseer, no state to issue commands. But everyone knew what needed to be done, because they were doing it for something they believed in. The sound of stone chisels ringing against limestone echoed through the early morning air. The smell of campfire smoke drifted up and mixed with the cold. And somewhere, someone was singing a ritual song that no one alive today will ever hear again. But a question follows. If hundreds, maybe thousands of people had to gather at the same spot and work together for years, for decades, who fed them? Who looked after the elderly and the young children back at camp? The answer is that they had to grow food, had to cultivate, had to raise animals, not because they woke up one day and decided to change their way of life, but because the necessity was created by gathering around the temple. Wild wheat seeds that had always been picked and eaten on the spot were now scattered into the soil near the site. Wild sheep that had always been hunted in open fields were now penned up near camp. Agriculture wasn't invented in a scientist's lab. It wasn't the result of careful planning. It emerged slowly, a byproduct of the need to feed all the people gathering together to worship something sacred. Temple first, then the farm followed. And that means faith, not hunger, gave birth to civilization. After the discovery of Göbekli Tepe, many archaeologists began arguing that religion wasn't a byproduct of civilization. Religion was its foundation. Humans didn't gather together because food was abundant. Humans gathered together because something pulled them out of the forests and deserts, something they couldn't resist. Göbekli Tepe holds one more mystery that archaeologists still can't fully explain. It was deliberately buried. About 2,000 years after its construction, this temple complex was filled in with dirt, rock, and rubble, as if the people of that era decided to hide it from the world's eyes, to keep anyone from seeing it, from using it. Why? We don't know. Maybe it was a ritual closing of an era. Maybe it was some kind of message sent forward to the future. Maybe they wanted the temple to sleep beneath the earth, waiting for a future generation to discover it when the time came. And that's exactly what happened. Thousands of years later, in an age of aeroplanes, cell phones, and satellites, the world's oldest temple had been sealed beneath a hill, waiting in silence, like a legend that had never been told. Until Klaus Schmidt's shovel hit it in 1994, and the world learned that at the very birthplace of human civilization, there were no rice paddies, no trading markets, no palaces. There was only a temple, and the people who knelt before it. This is a mechanism we were never taught in school, a system driven not by economic logic, but by something deeper, something that has lived inside every human being from the very beginning, and that has never faded, even after 11,000 years. What archaeologists found at Göbekli Tepe also points to something else worth noting. There are no traces of permanent dwellings nearby. No household trash pits, no cooking hearths, no evidence that anyone lived there full-time. Everything suggests Göbekli Tepe was a pilgrimage site. People came from far away, performed rituals, and left. Which means that before humans had cities, villages, or even permanent communities, they already had a sacred place, one that people from multiple groups knew about and traveled to together. The temple came before the city. Belief came before community. That's the sequence that turns everything we ever thought on its head. But there's something else worth noting about Göbekli Tepe. It's not just one structure. Archaeologists have identified traces of at least 20 stone enclosures spread across roughly 30 acres. Most are still underground, still unexcavated. What we can see today may be only a small portion of something far larger. And that only deepens the question, under other hills around the world, what else might be hidden? Could there be temples older than this one, or more monumental, still waiting to be found? The answer to that question could rewrite history of all over again. Archaeologists often say that every time we think we understand the past, the world sends up another piece of evidence that makes us start over from scratch. Göbekli Tepe is that piece of evidence, the one that says we're only just beginning to understand who we are. What we know for certain is this. On that hilltop in Turkey, more than 11,600 years ago, a group of human beings believed in something, believed deeply enough to pour their labor, their time, and perhaps their lives into building something greater than themselves. And in that belief, our civilization sparked to life. It's worth noting that the construction of Göbekli Tepe required a staggering amount of labor. Archaeologists estimate that moving each pillar, which weighed between 10 and 20 tons, required hundreds of workers, and carving each one took months. But there's no evidence of coercion, no signs that slaves or prisoners were used. What drove this project appears to have been something far deeper. A motivation that made people willingly endure hardship because they believed what they were doing mattered. In every era, humans have built wonders through the power of belief. The pyramids, the Gothic cathedrals of Europe, the emperors' tombs of China. All of them came from people who believed that what they were building carried a meaning beyond their own lives. Göbekli Tepe is the ancestor of everything humanity has ever built through faith. There's a clay tablet the size of a human palm, over 5,400 years old, still in a condition that can be read. It's held in museums in Baghdad and London, enclosed in temperature-controlled glass cases, tended with enormous care. On its surface, tiny wedge-shaped marks arranged in rows. They look like the footprints of a small bird that walked across wet mud before it dried and hardened. But those aren't bird tracks. Those are letters, the oldest letters in the history of humankind. And what's written on? That clay tablet isn't poetry, isn't a prayer, isn't a record of discovery, isn't a love letter. It's a ledger. 37 measures of barley, 12 sheep, and debts still owed by certain people who hadn't yet paid up. Human civilization didn't begin with love poetry or deep philosophy. It began with accounting and inventory management. Go back and look at the land we call Mesopotamia, a name from ancient Greek that means the land between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, which today runs through Iraq. About 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, this land didn't look like the parched terrain in photographs you see today. It was wet, fertile, and heavy with the smell of river mud after rain. Date palms lined the banks. Waterbirds swept low over brown water. And the soil here was darker and richer than almost anywhere else on Earth, perfect for growing. The Sumerians, the people who lived in the southern part of Mesopotamia, began building something the world had never seen. Not a village, not an oversized camp, but an actual city, with streets, markets, warehouses, a towering temple at its center, and tens of thousands of people living inside the same walls. Uruk was the name of that city, the greatest city of its age. At its peak, around 3100 BCE, Uruk had a population of roughly 40,000 people. Count the surrounding region, and that figure climbed to 80,000 or 90,000. It was the largest city in the world, by a wide margin, with no competition. Picture it. The afternoon sun of Mesopotamia baking the ground until it cracked. Wind carrying the smell of river mud and livestock. Cartwheels rattling over dirt roads. Merchants shouting to customers in the open market. Children running through the narrow gaps between sun-baked mud brick walls. And the great stepped temple tower called a ziggurat rising at the center of the city, visible from dozens of miles away. A city like that needs systems. When 40,000 people are living together, who knows who owns what? Who verifies that taxes have been collected in full? Who knows whether the grain warehouse has enough left for the dry season? Who confirms that the 100 workers sent to build the Northern Canal have finished what they were contracted to do? Those needs invented something that changed the world: writing. Cuneiform, the wedge script, was developed in Uruk around 3400 to 3200 BCE by pressing the cut end of a reed shaped like a triangle into soft clay, then drying or firing it hard. The first thing humans ever wrote was not their first love poem, not a prayer to the gods, not the laws of the land. The first thing humans ever wrote was, who's paid their taxes and who hasn't? How many measures of barley are left in storage? How many cattle were delivered to the temple? It sounds dull, but it was a revolution, because once you can write things down, you can build systems of real complexity. You can plan long-term. You can make promises and check whether those promises were kept. You can create rules everyone has to follow, and you can punish those who break them systematically, letter by letter, tablet by tablet. The thing we call the state was born, but that system came with something we might not have noticed at the time. When you record who owns what, some people inevitably own more than others. When you record who pays taxes and who doesn't, some people have the power to collect, and others have to be collected from. When you record whose child belongs to whom, you've created social classes that pass from generation to generation. Writing gave birth to order, and order gave birth to inequality. Before writing, people in a hunter-gatherer group knew who was skilled, who was brave, who was capable. But everything had to be proved again every single day. Brought in a big haul today, you earned respect. Came back empty-handed tomorrow, you proved yourself all over again. But once there was written record, a person's status could be fixed and inherited without ever having to prove anything again. The ruler's child became the ruler, the farmer's child became the farmer. Not because of ability, but because it was written down that way. The mud of Mesopotamia didn't just record numbers and inventory. It recorded the fate of human beings. It recorded who held power. It recorded who had to bow their head. And it recorded how long that system would continue. The answer? Thousands of years. We inherited the system carved into the mud of Uruk all the way to the present day. A system with those who record and those who are recorded. Those who collect and those who are collected from. Those who make the rules and those who must live under them. The numbers on a clay tablet from 5,000 years ago became the numbers in your bank account, in contracts, in laws, in the tax system you deal with today. The format changed. The medium shifted from clay to paper to screen. But the underlying logic never changed at all. Return for a moment to the life of someone in the city of Uruk. Under the blazing sun of Mesopotamia, a man sits in a small room beside the temple. In front of him, dozens of soft clay tablets are laid out in rows. In his right hand, a reed cut to a small triangular point. He presses into the clay carefully, twists, presses, twists again. Every mark, every symbol carries a precise meaning. This mark means 12 sheep. That one is the name of the district official to the north. Another means a debt still outstanding. The man has no idea that what he's doing will change the world. He's just doing his job, like every other accountant of his age. But his work, combined with the work of hundreds of other accountants over the preceding decades, had built a system unlike anything that had ever existed in the history of life on this planet. a system that could remember things without depending on any single human brain. Before writing, all knowledge lived inside people's heads. When someone died, their knowledge died with them. Rules were passed down by word of mouth, agreements required multiple witnesses, and history shifted with the memory of whoever was telling it. Once writing existed, everything changed. Knowledge could be preserved beyond any single human life. Laws could be cited with certainty, and history was pinned to clay tablets that outlasted memory. This was the power that let humans transcend the limits of biology. But it brought new limits of its own. Once something was written, it became very hard to change. Laws that had been written were difficult to amend. Rights that had been recorded were difficult to dispute. And social classes that had been specified were difficult to escape. Writing gave both freedom and chains at the same moment. And that tension is still very much with us today. In the world we live in now, the numbers on our phone screens, bank, balances, credit scores, social media follower counts, all trace their lineage back to those wedge marks pressed into clay in the city of Uruk 5,000 years ago. The surface has changed, the core hasn't. Humans still need to know who has what, who owes whom, and who has power over whom. And they still need to record it, so the system can keep running. The only difference is that today, the clay tablets have been replaced by server farms storing everyone's data simultaneously. But the logic? Still identical. When you transfer money through a banking app or fill out your annual tax return, you're doing exactly what that accountant in Uruk did 5,000 years ago. The reed became a keyboard. The clay became a server that will never crack or crumble. What if I told you that humans in what we call the primitive era were actually healthier than humans in the age of civilization? Would you believe that? In one anthropology museum, 2 skeletons are displayed side by side. The first belongs to a man who lived 12,000 years ago. He was a hunter. His bones are dense, thick, and complete. His teeth are worn from chewing animal hide, but not a single cavity. His height was roughly 5 feet 9 inches, built like something nature itself had engineered to perfection. The second belongs to a man who lived 8,000 years ago. He was a farmer. His bones are thin and warped. Both ankles show signs of bone inflammation. Multiple teeth have cavities, and he's noticeably shorter than the man from the earlier era. Both men lived in the same general region, separated by only about 600 miles, but 4,000 years apart in time. And the farmer, who lived in the age of civilization, had significantly worse health than the hunter from the era we label primitive. This is the truth no textbook ever tells you. Research compiled from hundreds of ancient skeletons across Europe and the Middle East has produced some startling findings. Early. Farmers in Europe were on average about 4 inches shorter than the hunter-gatherers who came before them. Males were shorter by as much as 5.5 inches. Dental damage from malnutrition was found in early farmers at nearly twice the rate of hunter-gatherers. Anemia from iron deficiency was 4 times higher. Signs of bacterial infection on bones were 3 times more common. And average life expectancy at birth for early farmers was around 19 years. Hunter-gatherers were living to around 26. What does this tell us? It tells us that when humans stopped wandering and started farming, our bodies didn't get stronger, they got weaker. The first reason is diet. Hunter-gatherers ate a wide variety: meat, fish, wild fruits, roots, dozens of types of seeds. The body received a full range of nutrients. But farmers had to depend on a small number of crops in a fixed area: barley, wheat, legumes. When drought came or disease hit the crops, food vanished suddenly. The body went without multiple essential nutrients. The second reason is crowding. Farmers lived in close quarters with their domesticated animals: pigs, cattle, goats, sheep, geese, all packed into confined spaces. And those animals were the source of diseases that had never existed before. Smallpox came from cattle, tuberculosis from bovines, chickenpox and many other plagues were all born during the period when humans began keeping animals and living alongside them. Population density in towns made these diseases spread faster. In a hunter-gatherer camp of 30 or 40 people, if someone got sick, the exposure stayed within a tiny group. But in a city of tens of thousands, the same disease could kill people by the thousands. Picture a narrow alley in an ancient city, stifling heat, the smell of animal dung and garbage mixed together, wastewater running through dirt channels, children walking barefoot on damp ground, and the dry coughing of the sick echoing from every direction. That was daily life for early city dwellers, not the romantic image of civilization you see in movies. But worse than disease was what happened when humans began accumulating property. Before agriculture, humans had nothing to fight over. Meat had to be eaten immediately after the hunt, fruit had to be eaten before it rotted, and land wasn't property because tomorrow the group would be somewhere else entirely. But once there were farms, granaries, houses, and plots of land, those things had to be defended. And what had to be defended became what others wanted to take. Organized warfare appeared alongside agriculture. Archaeologists have found evidence of massacres in Neolithic villages across Europe and Asia, bodies laid out in the same direction, indicating systematic killing, not accidents or animal attacks. The city walls you see in historical illustrations weren't built for decoration. They were built because there were people on the outside who wanted what was on the inside. And beyond that, with property came class. Whoever had more land, more grain, more cattle, had more power. Whoever was weaker or unluckier had to depend on whoever was stronger, and eventually had to work for them. Slavery wasn't born from the cruelty of any one individual. It emerged from the logic of an economic system built around the ownership of property. The inequality we talk about today has its roots in the first granary and the first plot of land a human being ever called mine. It's worth sitting with. What we call progress often comes paired with loss. And that loss isn't material, it's equality, freedom, and physical health. Civilization gave us walls, warmth, and a reliable food supply. But it took away open skies, the freedom to roam, and bodies hardened by nature. That early Neolithic farmer, the one with the warped bones and the rotting teeth, had no idea he was bearing the cost of a progress that people thousands of years later would benefit from. He just woke up, worked, went home, and went to sleep every day, with no idea that his life was carving the shape of the world the rest of us would live in. The truth may not be as beautiful as the legend, but it's the truth we have to face, ready or not. But in the midst of all that suffering, civilization did give us something of genuine value. When humans gathered in cities, they could divide labor. One person made pottery, another wove cloth, another forged metal tools, another kept written records. Specialization raised the quality of the work and pushed technology forward. When trade existed, knowledge and raw materials from distant places could flow and meet. Copper from Cyprus encountered tin from Afghanistan and became bronze, far stronger than either alone. Astronomical knowledge from Babylon traveled to Greece and became the foundation of modern science. When law existed, weaker people had rights the law formally recognized, even if in practice the law often served those in power. It was at least the beginning of an idea that everyone deserves to be treated fairly. Civilization isn't only loss, it's a trade, with both gains and costs. That farmer with the warped bones may have lived shorter than a hunter-gatherer, but his descendants might have had the chance to learn art, hear stories, or participate in rituals that gave life a kind of meaning the hunter never had. And maybe that's why humans never turned back. Because even though the body weakened, the mind gained something greater, something uniquely human, something no other creature on Earth has ever been able to create. The ability to record, preserve, and pass down experience across generations, across centuries, across millennia. Think of a young woman in a Neolithic village somewhere in Central Europe about 7,000 years ago. Her skeleton was found in a small grave. Her body was more fragile than her hunter-gatherer great-great-grandmothers by several generations. Her teeth were nearly all rotten, her spine was warped from a lifetime of bending over fields, and she died at only 23 years old. But beside her, archaeologists found jewelry made from seashells, from a coast hundreds of miles away, and pottery decorated with patterns unlike anything found in her village. That means she had something her great-great-grandmother's great-great-grandmother never had. A world wider than the forest around her home. A world where people from distant lands came to trade. A world where ideas and craftsmanship could cross mountains. She was gone young, but she had touched something no hunter-gatherer ever touched. And that is the mechanism hidden within every civilization. Many people must give something up so that others can receive something entirely new. The burdens are never distributed equally, and those who benefit most from the system and those who carry its heaviest costs are rarely the same. People. This imbalance has never gone away. It's important to remember, no era in history was perfect for everyone. Hunter-gatherers had freedom but faced hunger and the dangers of the wild. Early farmers had a reliable food supply, but paid for it with worse health and less independence. People alive today have comforts their ancestors couldn't have imagined, but they also carry stress, debt, and the feeling of being a tiny gear in a machine too large to fully see. The trade never stops, and it has no fixed right answer. There are only choices and the responsibility that comes with making them. There's a question philosophers often ask students in class. If you could be reborn and choose any era in history to live in, which would you choose? Most people say right now, because of modern medicine, electricity, air conditioning, food whenever you want it, the internet connecting everyone together. But if you asked a man wandering the open plains 200,000 years ago, if he could somehow hear you, he might tell you he already had everything he needed. Food, water, friends, open sky, and freedom. Maybe the answer to that question depends entirely on what you mean by a good life. Let's step back and look at the whole picture one more time. 12,000 years ago, a small group of people on a hilltop in Turkey decided to carve stone to honor something they couldn't see. That decision, small as it might sound, was the turning point that made humans begin gathering together, created the need to feed workers at the temple, and from that need came agriculture. From agriculture came villages, from villages came cities, and in those cities, writing was born to manage the complexity of life lived together. From marks pressed into clay came laws, from laws came states, from states came empires, and from those empires came the world you're living in right now. 5,000 years of accumulation, 5,000 years of building, and 5,000 years of tearing down, cycling back and forth relentlessly. But through all of it, humans have always been trading. We gave up freedom in the forest in exchange for safety behind city walls. We gave up physical health in exchange for a reliable supply of food in the granary. We gave up the equality of the hunter-gatherer band in exchange for systems capable of managing the complexity of life together. We gave up open skies in exchange for a roof overhead. Every exchange has those who gain and those who lose, those who benefit from the system and those who carry its costs. The people who built Göbekli Tepe with their bare hands had no idea what they were founding. They were just carving stone because they believed. The early farmers with the rotting teeth and the warped spines had no idea they were bearing the costs of civilization. They were just planting crops because they needed to eat. The accountants in the city of Uruk pressing wedge marks into clay had no idea they were laying the foundations of a system that would affect millions of people across the next several thousand years. They were just counting barley. History isn't written by heroes who knew what they were doing. It's written by ordinary people doing ordinary things every day, and the sum of those actions becomes what we call civilization. So where do we stand in all of this? From a stone temple in Turkey that's over 11,600 years old to the skyscrapers of New York, Tokyo, and Dubai, humans have never stopped building, never stopped gathering, never stopped creating systems of ever-increasing complexity. The technology we use today, the algorithms filtering what you see, the financial systems determining who has purchasing power and who doesn't, the social structures determining who gets opportunities and who doesn't, all of it descends from those wedge marks on clay tablets in the city of Uruk. The form changes, the complexity grows, but the underlying mechanism stays the same. There are those who record and those who are recorded, those who set the rules and those who must play by them, those at the top of the pyramid and those carrying the pyramid on their shoulders. Civilization is the most extraordinary thing humans have ever built. We've designed medicines that cure diseases that once killed millions. We've sent spacecraft beyond the solar system. We've written music that moves people to tears. And we've written books that help humans understand each other's hearts across every border and every language. But civilization is also the box we've put ourselves inside, a system we built to manage ourselves. And sometimes that system ends up working for itself, not for the people living inside it. This isn't a story about evil. There are no villains in this chapter of history. There are only humans doing what seemed reasonable in their own context, and the accumulated result of all those reasonable decisions becoming a world too complex for any of us to fully comprehend. The origin of human civilization was not a moment of glory or of darkness. It was a moment of choice, choices made without knowing where they would lead. And every generation since has inherited both the blessings and the burdens of those choices. So have you. Every morning you wake up, you are inheriting the legacy of a hunter who carved stone more than 12,000 years ago. The legacy of a farmer with warped bones. The legacy of an accountant pressing wedge marks into clay. And the legacy of countless ordinary people doing small things every day until those small things became this world. History doesn't teach us who was right or who was wrong. It only teaches us that every generation does the best it can with what it knows in its own moment. And the result of that becomes the world the next generation has to deal with. We are the result of every decision that came before us, and our children will be the result of the decisions we make today. A philosopher once said that what separates humans from every other animal isn't intelligence, it's not tool use, and it's not living in social groups. Many animals do all of those things. What separates humans is our ability to believe in things that don't physically exist, in stories that humans invented, in systems that humans constructed. Money is something humans made up, but it's real for everyone who believes in it. The law is something humans invented, but it carries enough power to send people to prison or set them free. A nation is an idea humans created, but it has made millions of people willing to die or willing to kill. This is the real power of our species, not the power of muscles or brains, but the power of storytelling, of building shared belief in something invisible and making that invisible thing more powerful than anything you can touch. Göbekli Tepe is the evidence that this power has been with us for more than 11,000 years. And today, when you open social media, read the news, listen to politicians speak, or watch an advertisement tell you that this product will make you happy, you are surrounded by stories that humans invented. Stories with power. Stories that move the world. The important question isn't whether those stories are true or false. The important question is, who wrote them? And what did they write them for? That is the question every civilization in every era has tried to keep people from asking. And that is exactly why we have to keep asking it, no matter how beautiful or how painful the answer turns out to be. One more thing worth considering. In every generation that has ever come before us, there were people who questioned the system they were living inside. In ancient Mesopotamia, there were poets who wrote verses of complaint against injustice. In ancient Greece, there were philosophers who questioned the foundations of the state. There were revolutionaries who tried to overturn social structures. And there were ordinary people who quietly stepped outside the system in small ways by refusing rules they found unjust. The desire to question the system is as much a part of human nature as the desire to build one. Humans build and tear down, build again and tear down again, cycling through all of history. And in that cycle, civilization evolves, slowly, non-linearly, but never standing still. True history is not a straight line moving from savagery toward progress. It's a jagged line, twisting, spiraling, rising and falling and rising again without end. And all of us alive today are standing somewhere on that line. You may feel like a small piece of a system so vast you can never see it whole, but every action you take, every small choice you make in daily life, is part of a story still being written. We began by carving stone to honor something invisible, and across more than 10,000 years since, we've never stopped searching for the meaning of life, never stopped asking questions, and never stopped building things larger than ourselves. Maybe that's what actually separates us from every other living thing on this planet. Not intelligence, not technology, but the hunger to understand who we are and why we're here. And that question still has no answer. The black box has been sealed. Until next time, take care.